Joshua stood at the very edge of the Jordan Valley, his boots sinking into the parched, cracked earth. Before him, the stone walls of Jericho rose like a mountain, an impenetrable barrier blocking the path to the promised land. He gripped the hilt of his sword, his knuckles white, the metal biting into his palm. Behind him, the army waited in absolute stillness. Thousands of men stood in rows, their breath held tight, the air thick with the weight of 6 days of marching. No one spoke, no one moved. Joshua scanned the parapets, watching for movement, but the city remained silent, as if it were a tomb waiting for the end. The sky above was heavy, choked with charcoal-colored storm clouds. He looked toward the 7 priests, their eyes fixed on his signal. He drew a sharp breath and raised his sword high. The steel caught a sliver of light, signaling the end of the wait. The signal held steady in the air. 7 priests stepped forward, their movements synchronized and deliberate. They lifted the trumpets, the metal gleaming with a dull, heavy luster under the bruised sky. Joshua kept his arm locked, his eyes tracking the slight tremor in the lead priest's hands as they brought the mouthpieces to their lips. A second passed, then 2. The silence of the valley deepened, becoming so absolute it felt like a physical weight. Then the first note broke. It was a piercing, singular vibration that sliced through the heavy air. The sound expanded, joined by the other 6, weaving into a dissonant, thunderous chorus. Joshua felt the hilt of his sword hum in his grip, the metal responding to the frequency of the blast. The priests blew with everything they had, their faces flushed with the strain of sustaining the volume. The sonic pressure intensified, hammering the stone until the air itself seemed to liquefy. Joshua felt the shockwaves travel up through his boots, a rhythmic pounding that turned the ground into a treacherous, shifting surface. Men behind him stumbled, arms flailing to maintain balance as the earth beneath them buckled and rolled. He planted his feet wide, his eyes locked onto the massive gate. The sound was a physical weight, a grinding, dissonant roar. Then, the impossible happened. A thin, jagged line appeared on the surface of the main gate, a hairline fracture that snaked upward. Dust began to rain down from the high parapets, a fine, gray powder that choked the air and turned the sky into a hazy curtain. Joshua did not blink. He watched the fracture pulse, the stone groaning under a stress it was never built to withstand. The structure was failing, the foundation losing its grip, and the once impenetrable barrier began to surrender. A deep, guttural groan erupted from the very foundations of the city, a sound like tectonic plates grinding against one another in the dark. The massive stone blocks began to shift, sliding out of alignment with a violent, jarring force. Joshua watched as the outer wall buckled outward, the masonry losing its cohesion as if the stone had turned to sand. A section of the rampart folded, collapsing inward with a thunderous roar that shook the valley floor. Huge slabs of rock plummeted, shattering into jagged heaps. The towers above swayed, their silhouettes tilting at impossible angles before they plummeted into the city streets, vanishing behind a curtain of gray debris. The sound of the collapse was absolute, a final, crushing impact that silenced the trumpets. For a heartbeat, the air hung heavy with the weight of the fallen fortress. Then, the silence broke. The Israelite warriors let out a collective, primal roar that drowned out the dying wind. They surged forward as one. Joshua kept his sword raised, his gaze fixed on the chaos of falling towers and shifting stone. The army did not hesitate, pouring into the gap. Joshua stepped over a jagged, fallen stone, his boots crunching on the pulverized remains of the gate. He moved with purpose, his sword still held high, guiding the momentum of the army behind him. Ahead, the city interior was a landscape of ruin. Ancient structures groaned one last time before giving way, turning the once impenetrable fortress into a field of broken masonry. A final, isolated tower swayed, then plummeted, sending a massive shockwave of dust rolling across the plain. Joshua did not flinch. He stood amidst the settling gray powder, watching the last of the debris drift to the ground. The air began to clear, revealing the horizon beyond the city limits. The path ahead lay open, silent and unobstructed. Joshua lowered his blade, his gaze fixed on the distance. The victory was absolute.